Hello, welcome to Facts Don't Lie with Justin Webb. As always, I have to ask, America, what are we doing? These last couple weeks, it's been a lot. We have the January 6th committee hearings, major life-changing decisions from SCOTUS at the end of their term, as well as the first major gun legislation in the last 30 years. As always, let's start with the facts. January 6th committee initially scheduled 5 hearings and then added a sixth emergency hearing. We'll get into that. Supreme Court of the United States, SCOTUS, handed down decisions in New York State versus Bruin, which impacted Second Amendment rights for Americans dealing with concealed carry, as well as the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization, dealing with essentially abortion and overturning Roe v. Wade. And that was followed up by Congress passing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which President Biden signed into law about a week ago. Okay, now getting to the January 6th committee hearings, and we're going to start with day one. And the focus of the committee was on former White House officials and the idea that the claims of election fraud were false. Former Attorney General Bill Barr, of course, now famously saying essentially that the idea that the election was stolen was ridiculous and that he told the president it was bullshit. He also then stated that in a December 2020 meeting, he informed Trump that he didn't want to be a part of it. Also, just to remember, with the election fraud claims, they were 1 and 61 in courts, going all the way up to and including the Supreme Court of the United States. If you recall, in the case brought by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, although Justices Alito and Thomas, and I should go back and point out, this is, and we'll get into it when we talk about their decisions, one of the more conservative Supreme Courts in a very long, long time. And even with that conservative lean, Justice Alito and Thomas did not dissent in that case, but they did offer a disagreement. They did believe that original jurisdiction existed. That is the idea that it was a state versus state issue. But they stated in their disagreement that in my view, we do not have the discretion to deny the filing of a bill of complaint in a case that falls within our original jurisdiction. I would therefore grant the motion to file the bill of complaint, but would not grant other relief, and I express no view on any other issue. Basically, what that means is, although they believed it was a case that they should hear as it relates to original jurisdiction, they were not willing to offer what the plaintiffs were asking for, and they were not going to give any views on any other issue. They did not want to have any sort of legal precedent addressing any of the legal arguments. So you may often hear people talk about the idea that it was just that cases didn't have any standing, but this pretty clearly outlines that they just weren't going to grant what was being asked. So that's more than an issue of just standing. Okay. Additionally, on this day, there was video shown of testimony by Ivanka Trump. She was asked, how she reacted to then Attorney General Bill Barr's statement. Basically, she said that his statement affected her and that she accepted what he was saying, in line with the idea that the election fraud claims were false. In addition, the committee shared some new footage. They reinforced this desire of Trump and his allies to overturn the election results leading up to January 6th. And there were, other conversations from administration officials. Also key on this date was the idea that Trump didn't make any effort to stop the actions at the Capitol, that he approved of what was going on. And there was testimony from inside the White House, basically as it was relating to Mike Pence, that Trump stated, maybe our supporters have the right idea. Mike Pence deserves it. And this was, of course, in relation to the crowd chanting, hang Mike Pence. There was also some greater detail given on what Trump knew and what he was okay with, and that the only person on January 6th that took any steps to stop the attack on the Capitol was actually Mike Pence and not Trump. They then turned to the Proud Boys, gave some evidence of their movements, and basically they had left the ellipse where the Stop the Steal speech was being given prior to the end, and they had actually headed towards the Capitol at that time, and possibly they were even urging others to do the same and join them. And so that pretty much wraps up what happened in the committee hearing for day one. As we move on to day two, the focus of the committee shifted to the fact that Trump would not accept the reality of the 2020 election that he had lost, that instead he focused on conspiracy theories and a relentless grift effort for his followers. Included on this day of testimony were taped interviews with professionals from the 2020 campaign. This included Bill Stepien, the campaign manager, senior advisor Jason Miller, and multiple lawyers. Basically, the summary of what they said was that the outlook of the election was bleak on election night. They told Trump he should not declare victory, that he was likely to lose, that election fraud claims were, as Bill Barr had named them, bogus and silly, idiotic and stupid. Republicans, the committee used Republicans who were close to Trump to reinforce the ideas, the lunacy of these claims, and again, going back to the words of Bill Barr, that they were a disservice to the country. And rather than accepting the loss, Trump, just sort of steeped himself in the conspiracy theories and not accepted the reality. Even though he was presented theories that were debunked over and over again, he just moved to the next rather than accepting the reality. Former acting Attorney General Donahue said in his taped testimony, speaking of Trump, he wouldn't fight us on it. He would just move on to the other. Meaning, as they debunked each theory, he just kind of, went to these sort of, well, what about this one? This day also, basically featured Barr saying that Trump's belief in election fraud at this point demonstrated that he was detached from reality. And there was a heavy use of Republicans, again, by the committee to add credibility to the evidence that they had presented. Next, we moved on to the idea that the grift was real. Using Stop the Steal, some $250 million was raised from the election lies of Trump from his supporters following Election Day. $150 million of that was done in the first week following the election. Most of the money, though, went to groups supporting Trump, not to fund the court battles, which is what people were told when they were fundraising. And most of that money going specifically to the Save America PAC. And this was not an isolated incident. More than $135 million was refunded to donors from Trump's re-election campaign, the Republican National Committee, and their shared accounts in the 2020 cycle through June 2021. This was due to an auto-renew box being pre-checked for people who signed up to donate to the campaign without their knowledge. And then as it worked out, they worked out this refund as a way to get the money back to those people because they didn't know that they were agreeing to an auto-renew, and just demonstrating the lengths that they would go to continue to raise money for the campaign without even informing donors. Really, I think this just is another way to demonstrate that there's a serious need for major campaign finance reform. Probably a topic for a different show. Also on this date, very importantly, there were claims, previous to the committee hearings, as leading up to them, this idea that there had been members of Congress who had led tours of the Capitol complex prior to January 6th. People at the time, a lot of conservatives said that this wasn't true. Specifically, Representative Barry Loudermilk said that he did not give tours to the Capitol, but the committee released video of him actually giving a tour on January 5th. Once the video came out, Representative Loudermilk then went to this sort of semantic defense that, well, those were tours of the Capitol complex, not of the Capitol proper. Again, I think just kind of a ridiculous assertion. Once it was proven that he had actually given the tour, he had to try to find a way out of it. In addition to that, in the video, you can see that people on the tour took photos of some security checkpoints, and what different media outlets were saying were uncommon parts of the complex. One particular stairway that members use frequently to get to and from the Capitol proper, from the Capitol complex. There was an individual taking a picture of that area, and I think the rationale was that there was a gold sconce in the area. I think this would be pretty easily resolved. The individuals who took those pictures certainly could produce those images, but I think that's probably not likely to happen, and that's why those sort of bullshit excuses were offered. In addition, individuals who were on that tour on the 5th returned to the Capitol on January 6th. They actually called out specific members of Congress. This also contradicts Representative Loudermilk's statements that these were people who were peaceful. And he also specifically said not involved and had no MAGA hats. And indeed, one of the men in the video who did return the next day was, of course, wearing a MAGA hat. In the video, that man could be heard saying, "There's no escape, Pelosi, Schumer, Nadler. We're coming for you. We're coming in like white on rice for Pelosi, Nadler, Schumer, even you, AOC. We're coming to take you out and pull you out by your hairs." And this gets back to this idea of, why lie? Why would Representative Loudermilk lie about the tour? Why would he lie about the individuals who were on the tour? Why would he lie about the activities of those individuals? clearly, now that we've seen the video, now that we know what they've done, we can see that there is some level of connection, whether he knew it or not, between those individuals and the activities on January 6th. Okay, this now takes us to day 3 of the committee hearing. On day 3 of the January 6th committee hearings, the focus shifted to Vice President Mike Pence. Um, and I do want to, before we get into day 3, I do want to point out it's important, and because sometimes he's been seen in this light. Mike Pence is not a hero. Okay, he did what was right, and the idea that people are saying that is some level of heroism, I think, speaks more to where we are as a society. That people just doing what they're supposed to do somehow elevates them to some level of heroism. I do think there was a level of maybe some bravery in terms of the people in the Capitol and Pence not wanting to leave and wanting to maintain the appearance of the democracy in the U.S. Certainly, there's some truth to that, but this hero status, I'm not really buying it. What he did do, though, is not succumb to the pressure, which I think was pretty immense on him, and did not make any effort to decertify the election. If he had, democracy in the United States would have been in crisis, and it would have created a constitutional crisis that we really haven't seen in our lifetime, maybe ever. And this pressure came from the very top. President Trump repeatedly tweeting about Mike Pence doing the right thing and being brave enough to do the right thing, and that he had the ability to do it, which was not true. There was even the exchange, which sort of speaks to the juvenile nature of Trump, where he said, basically to Pence, oh, you don't have the power. Well, wouldn't it be cool if you did? And then, telling him later in that same conversation, if you don't do this, I won't be your friend. We were back in middle school. In addition, Ivanka, during her video testimony, testified that there was a heated phone call between then President Trump and Pence as it related to this idea of being able to overturn the election results and use alternate electors. And after the riot, Trump attorney John Eastman reached out to Pence. Attorney Greg Jacob said he was urging Pence at that point to send it back to the states. Pence rejected that. And earlier, Jacob said that he had told Eastman, because of your bullshit, we're in this situation, meaning the mob actually storming the Capitol on January 6th. Eastman then responded in that conversation that it was on Pence because he didn't do what Eastman and Trump were asking. Jacob then further testified that Eastman admitted on the 5th that he wouldn't want a Democratic vice president to do the same thing he was asking Mike Pence to do, and that he didn't believe that a Democratic vice president in the future or Mike Pence, on January 6th actually legally could do that. Again, Eric Hirschman, who was a White House lawyer, then said that he told Eastman there would be riots if his memo was enacted, and Eastman responded, and I quote, "There's been violence in the history of our country to protect our republic." Again, just further demonstrating that Eastman was okay with what possibly could happen if they were to go ahead with this scheme, which he knew to be not legal and not something that Pence could do. Once the January 6th riot occurred, Eastman then reached out, actually sent an email to Rudy Giuliani. He was asking to be put on the pardon list. This didn't happen. And when Eastman was brought before the January 6th committee, he pleaded the fifth at least 100 times. This pleading the fifth and reaching out to be put on the pardon list, as well as Eastman's comments as they were relayed in the testimony, I think demonstrate he knew that he was up against it, that what he was doing wasn't kosher, and there was going to be a price to be paid for it. According to Jacob, they knew Eastman and Trump were asking Pence to do something he didn't have the authority to do. Jacob asked Eastman if he had relayed this to then President Trump, the idea that he knew that Pence couldn't do this. He said he had, but that, once Trump gets something in his head, it's hard to get out. So basically he was, dead set that this was the path they were going to take. Also interesting to note that earlier in the year, a federal judge, I believe it was in the Ninth Circuit, did issue a non-binding opinion that it was more likely than not that Trump and Eastman conspired and corruptly attempted to obstruct Congress, given their actions before and on January 6th. Shortly after this, a search warrant was issued for John Eastman's phone. This is really a major point, and I'm going to tell you why. To understanding that a search warrant means someone was able to convince a judge that it was likely that a crime occurred and evidence of that crime was going to be found in the area to be searched. So, and it's also likely, given the high-profile nature of the case and John Eastman, that Merrick Garland himself is probably the individual who signed off on the application for the search warrant. So, given that you likely have the Attorney General of the United States signing off on this warrant, and the fact that a judge, believed, based on what was presented to them, that it was reasonable that evidence of a crime existed on John Eastman's phone, this again just reinforces the idea that they knew what they were doing was wrong. This brings us to day 4 of the January 6th committee hearings. And the focus here on day 4 was the fake elector scheme and the connection to former President Trump. The day began with Arizona House Speaker Russell Rusty Bowers, a Republican, a man who actually, during his testimony, said he wanted Donald Trump to win. He voted for Donald Trump. Nevertheless, he says he resisted repeated requests from Trump and his allies to change the 2020 election results from Arizona. The reason being he saw no evidence supporting the claims of fraud and didn't want to be used as a pawn. He also specifically stated his duty to the Constitution required that he move forward and submit the electors that were for now President Joe Biden. Bowers also spoke to efforts by Rudy Giuliani, who wanted him to decertify the election. He wanted him to replace the elected Joe Biden electors certified by the state legislature with fake Trump ones. Bowers also commented that at one time Giuliani sort of made a comment that he had no evidence regarding the election fraud, and Bowers said he thought maybe this was a bit of a Freudian slip on Giuliani's part, and that multiple witnesses to the comment afterwards sort of laughed about it. The fact that he had essentially admitted, one way or another, that they had no evidence. Also, Bowers mentioned that, again, back to White House Attorney John Eastman had pushed Bowers to decertify the electors. He said even if they didn't think or know if it defied the Constitution, he just wanted them to do it. Bowers, again, Eastman said, just do it and let the courts sort it out. So again, pushing for activities that they know to likely be not legal or possibly even not able to do, and possibly illegal, but still pushing for them to occur. Next, we had Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger, again a Republican. This is the one who Trump asked to find enough votes, right? You remember the sort of now infamous phone call, fellas, I need 11,000 votes, give me a break. Also, his deputy, Gabe Sterling. During his testimony, Raffensperger debunked several claims by the Trump administration of election fraud. He went sort of point by point. And these were some of the things that they tried to use to pressure him to overturn the results in Georgia. According to Raffensperger, the claim was that 10,315 dead people voted. They found 4. That 66,000 underage voters voted. They found 0, believing that this was related to the fact that in Georgia, if you are 17 and a half, you are allowed to register to vote as long as you will be 18 on election day. Again, the claim by the Trump campaign was that there were 2,423 non-registered voters. Raffensperger noted they found 0. 2,056 felons was the claim voted. Raffensperger said there were 74 or less who were still on a felony sentence that actually voted. And then in relation to this point-by-point account, Raffensperger quote, Raffensperger, the numbers are the numbers. Okay. So just, again, demonstrating how far these Republican officials went to investigate these claims of election fraud. Also in Georgia, there were multiple recounts, multiple audits. There was the now debunked video from the State Farm Center in Atlanta. But, again, the push by the campaign, by Trump, by his administration officials, by some of his attorneys was, again, to continue to push for overturning a free and fair election. Committee also heard from Shay Moss, who was an election worker in Georgia. She was wrongly accused of committing election fraud by Trump and Trump allies. She was subject to attacks, and her mother, Ruby Freeman, was also subjected to attacks. Overall, many of these officials, Bauer, Raffensperger, Sterling, Moss, and Ruby Freeman, as well as others, were doxxed. They were faced with threats. Ruby Freeman, some even so severe that the FBI actually advised her to leave her home so that she would be safe. And there was additional pressure as well From Congress, Arizona Republican Representative Andy Biggs wanted Bowers to sign an actual decertification of electors. Bauer, of course, refused. And then in this hearing, we also found the information that Senator Ron Johnson, a Republican from Wisconsin, had actually made an offer through his office to the vice president's office to deliver actual fake electors to Vice President Mike Pence. There were text messages between a staffer for Johnson and a staffer for then Vice President Mike Pence, stating that Senator Johnson had some papers that he needed to get to Mike Pence, and this was just literally minutes before the January 6th process was to occur. Then, once it was sort of determined that what it was that they were trying to give him, Pence's aide said, do not give those to the vice president. And all of this just really demonstrates exactly how far the Stop the Steal effort was willing to go to achieve their end. Now, this takes us to day 5 of the January 6th committee hearings. The focus on this day was Trump's attempts to use the Justice Department to overturn the election and the pardon list. Richard Donahue, former acting Deputy Attorney General, said that, according to him, he testified that Trump said to him, and I quote, "Just say it was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman." Again, the idea of not having to prove that there was any election fraud, just sort of put the idea out there and then they'll roll with the rest of it. Trump met daily with officials from the Justice Department, those who are at the top. He continued to push claims of election fraud. This is the Bill Barr during his testimony sort of referred to this as a game of whack-a-mole, constantly debunking these theories. They researched them when they brought them, but they found no there. Eventually, this pressure led to Bill Barr resigning his post as Attorney General. Acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen then received calls, he says, every day except Christmas and New Year's Eve regarding Trump's false claim, including some as absurd as this Italian satellite story that they were rigged to switch votes. Trump then threatened to replace Rosen with someone who would act on the false claims. This threat was that he was going to install Jeffrey Clark, who was basically in the Department of Justice, but a EPA lawyer. And the only thing really based on the testimony of those during the hearing that stopped Trump from installing Jeffrey Clark were threats of mass resignations throughout the Justice Department. And this is why he didn't make the move. He didn't like the optics of that. And it is also to note, too, previous to the hearings, the evening previous to this hearing, a search warrant was served on Jeffrey Clark's home. Again, this idea of the search warrant, the idea that a judge was convinced that there was likely evidence of a crime existing in his home and a high-profile individual. It's also believed that, this went all the way to the top, with Attorney General Merrick Garland probably being the one to sign off on the application for the search warrant. Now, moving to the pardons, multiple witnesses, including lawyers and White House staff, said that 5, maybe even 6 Republicans asked for pardons. It is believed those who asked were Representative Matt Gaetz from Florida, Mo Brooks of Alabama, Louis Gohmert from Texas, Andy Biggs of Arizona, and Scott Perry of Pennsylvania. Also, there was some question as to whether Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia had asked for one. A White House staffer heard that she had asked for one, but didn't know firsthand. Greene, of course, denies that she had asked for a pardon. All have denied wrongdoing. One of the Republican representatives on the committee, Anna Kinzinger from Illinois, he stated, "The only reason I know to ask for a pardon is if you committed a crime." And this is sort of buttressed up by a 1915 Supreme Court ruling in Burdick versus United States, which states, "A pardon carries an imputation of guilt, acceptance, a confession of it." It's also important to note that if an individual accepts a pardon for a crime, they no longer are able to assert their Fifth Amendment right because they cannot incriminate themselves from a crime that they have committed, but they have been given a pardon for. So this just further supports the idea that asking for or being issued a pardon does come with it this air of guilt. Representative Jamie Raskin also offered requesting the pardon itself is not a crime in the United States, but that if we use he called it Tom Painian common sense, that it would indicate some conscience of guilt or fear that you could be prosecuted for what you did, right? And that pretty much wraps up day 5 of the January 6th committee hearings. Once we get to day 6, we now get to Miss Cassidy Hutchinson, which is the hearing that was not scheduled initially, but was added, and you sort of knew that there was going to be something pretty sensational to come from that. Just it was really unexpected and kind of 11th hour, and the day did not disappoint. This day, offered really some of the most, I think, salacious, testimony to this point. And one thing I do want to talk about a little bit before we get into what happened and the idea of what was going to be so juicy about this day, and it didn't disappoint. It is important to remember these are committee hearings. It is not a court of law. Okay, individuals are under oath, so there is a risk of being in contempt of Congress, and that carries with it some penalties. So that's also important to note. But the idea that people are going to get cross-examined or any of that kind of thing, that doesn't exist, or that hearsay is not something that's admissible. It's not a court of law, so that doesn't exist. Okay. So Cassidy Hutchinson, who was an aide to then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, shared some pretty eye-opening and by some accounts jaw-dropping testimony. First, she shared the story of being in the dining area where she helped a valet clean ketchup off the wall, where she alleges that President Trump had become so incensed with the Attorney General's statement that the claims of election fraud were false, that he chucked his lunch across the room and, the ketchup went across the room and was on the wall. Then there, of course, is the most contentious statement that she made regarding the limo that, once then President Trump got into the limo and was informed by the Secret Service that he would not be going to the Capitol, he became so irate that he demanded, I'm the fucking president, take me to the Capitol. And then, according to her, and this is a story she says was related to her by Tony Ornato, and that Bobby Engel was present while the story was being related, that he reached forward, grabbed for the steering wheel in the presidential SUV, and then lunged in the direction of, I believe it was the driver, as she stated, somewhere in the clavicle area. Now, what Cassidy Hutchinson also shared on this date was that when she was recounting the story and Tony Ornato and Bobby Engel were in the room, neither of them gave her any indication that her recount was incorrect or offered any separate details. Now, certainly after this came out, there were statements, that there were sources who stated that both Ornato and Engel are willing to testify under oath that these statements by Cassidy Hutchinson were not true. There was a statement put out by the Secret Service also saying, that these statements weren't true and they were willing to testify. And here's where I would like to point out that, yes, while Cassidy Hutchinson offered testimony that of a story she was told by someone else, and that would fall under a legal definition of hearsay, the same is true for these statements by sources or by the Secret Service itself, stating that Ornato and Engel were willing to testify contrary to the statement of Cassidy Hutchinson. So you really still don't have enough information based on either of those things to say 100% what she says was or wasn't true. I do find it really, really important, though, that the effort to discredit Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony focused on this one event and not perhaps the most important issue that she testified about. Early on, this wasn't really talked about. In the days that followed, it became more and more, pointed out by many more individuals that really what was most important about what she testified to was the idea that President Trump was aware that magnometers, basically metal detectors, were being used to scan the supporters who were coming into the ellipse for his speech, and that this was not allowing them to have as many people in the area, as well as making sure they didn't have any weapons, and that she says that President Trump said, get rid of the effing magnometers, let the people in. They're not here to hurt me. If they can get into the ellipse, then they can then they can march with me to the Capitol or something to that effect, right? So basically, at the time, because the inauguration hadn't happened yet, the electoral process was going to occur. The sitting president of the United States was aware that people had weapons, and there were radio calls from law enforcement on the day of January 6th different elements of the crowd, people in trees with weapons, people who were armed with AR-15s, 9mm, poles with sharp objects or spears at the top, all sorts of weapons, actually wanted to go with those protesters to the Capitol. Okay, if the Secret Service hadn't made the correct decision not to take the president, and their decision was based on security, as it should be, because that's their job, to protect the president, okay, we would have had the sitting president marching to the Capitol with armed supporters trying to overthrow the results of a free and fair election. Okay, that would have been the moment. That image would have been the moment the United States went full banana republic, something that we don't expect to see in the United States of America, only in third world countries. Okay, and it's important to note, no one that pushed back on Cassidy Hutchinson's testimony pushed back on this point. Okay, that the president knew people were armed, wanted them to remove the metal detectors to allow more people in, and have those people then move from the speech on the ellipse to the Capitol, and he intended to go with them, which, by the way, don't forget, he said in his speech, we're going to the Capitol, and I'm going with you. And the Secret Service itself also issued a statement saying that, yes, President Trump wanted to go to the Capitol and became irate when he wasn't allowed to go. Okay? Now, what I really want to get to is, why does all of this matter? And I have 4 examples, and I'm going to say that they sort of escalate in importance. And so the first I'm going to start with is the Pennsylvania GOP Senate primary. And this is where David McCormick was trailing Dr. Mehmet Oz, who was the celebrity physician backed by Trump, by less than 0.1% of the vote. He was going to get a recount anyway because it was in the 0.5% margin of victory in Pennsylvania, which automatically calls for a recount. And there was an issue regarding undated mail-in ballots. The Supreme Court had previously ruled that these could be counted, and this was similar to mail-in ballot issues during the 2020 election. And if you recall, during the 2020 election, and the issue that SCOTUS had previously ruled on, it featured Republicans who were dead set against this idea that these ballots could be counted. But now you have McCormick, who believes these ballots would have helped his campaign, pushing for the same thing, right? So just a few months or a year before, when it didn't serve the needs of the GOP, they were dead set against it. But now you have this issue being brought to the fore because, again, I believe this idea of election fraud and what's going on became sort of this strategy that I think is sort of the default now for the GOP. Okay, the next in the Georgia governor GOP primary, Candice Taylor, you may know her also as the Jesus Guns baby lady. She had that put on her bus, her campaign bus. She finished third, only receiving 3.4% of the vote in the GOP primary. She, of course, claimed election fraud and refused to concede. She put out a video to her supporters. In the video, she said God told her to ask her supporters to submit notarized affidavits declaring that they voted for her, to prove that they voted for her, and that she would collect enough of these affidavits to be able to demonstrate that she received enough of the vote to actually win the nomination. And that then once these affidavits were presented, that she would be then awarded the nomination. I mean, just absolutely bananas, right? But again, it's someone in the GOP believing that this claims of election fraud and some alternate form of, demonstrating that they had actually been the true victor, is something that they're going to. Next, we have the Arizona governor GOP primary debate. And I really can't do this one justice on my own, so I am going to share a video with you now.
I'd actually like to ask everybody on this stage if they would agree we had a corrupt, stolen election. Raise your hand. Did we have?
I would like to. I'm not going to play your stunt.
Why not get high-tech people that are going to be on the machines that are Republicans? A Democrat, Republican, get supervisors, equal amount.
That happens. We have parties looking over election results.
They're doing it now.
No,
they're actually telling us.
Scott, are you going to accept the results of this election if you think there's so much fraud that it can't be trusted?
Are you talking about the primary I'm currently in?
I'm talking about the primary.
The one we're in now?
Yes.
We're going to see what happens.
We're going to show up and vote in droves. They're going to have to cheat even harder in order to try to win this.
Your campaign's a psyop.
Okay, my head hurts after playing that. It just really hurts.
Yeah. What in the actual fuck, right? So for those of you who aren't watching the video and just listening, there was a question initially posed by Carrie Lake. She is the front runner in the GOP primary. She is the one who is endorsed by Trump, likely because of her support of the idea that the 2020 election was fraudulent. She is the one who posed the question. 3 of the 4 candidates in the video raised their hand, saying that there was election fraud in 2020. Karen Taylor Robson, sort of your run-of-the-mill GOP candidate, wife of a wealthy businessman, is the one who, I don't know if you quite heard it, she said, when the question of fraud came, I'm not going to play your game. She was the only one not to, affirmatively state that the 2020 election was fraudulent. Then you had Paula Tuliani Zen. She is the one who was talking about, apparently he's completely unfamiliar with how elections work, saying that you should have a Republican and a Democrat overseeing these election machines, and then basically had to be reminded by the moderator that, yes, that's what already happens. And then she said, well, yeah, but that was as a result of the fraud. And he, of course, reminds her, no, that's just the way that it's done. And then Scott Neely, of course, who wouldn't even commit to accepting the results of the GOP primary, right? Saying we still have to see how it works out. It should be noted that he's roughly polling at about 1%. He's also the one who at the end of the video refers to Carrie Lake's campaign as a psyop. So just kind of a mess, right? But what do we see? We see these continued claims of election fraud from 2020. The idea that even this process is possibly fraudulent by Scott Neely, at least, and the idea of the fraud that just exists in American elections. It should be noted too. The Heritage Foundation conducted I believe it was like a 20-year study on election fraud, and they found time and time and time again, well, yes, you do find small evidence of fraud in elections. They could not find a single instance with the information they were provided of widespread election fraud that would, overturn the results of election in any way. Then, I think the one that should be the most concerning of these 4 examples of why this stuff matters and why what I think needs to happen as a result of the January 6th committee hearings occurred in Otero County, New Mexico, often referred to as a red dot in a blue state. I think the only county in New Mexico that is conservative in the way they vote. There were 3 county commissioners who refused to certify the vote from a state primary. They were citing election fraud concerns related to some conspiracy theories regarding election machines. Have we heard that one before? I think we have, right? So this primary ballot included races at all levels, including Congress, governor, attorney general, and many local offices. The impact of this is that the races could not have been official until all counties were certified. So this one county was essentially holding up the certification of the election for the entire state, potentially disenfranchising an entire state of voters. New Mexico Secretary of State Maggie Toulouse Oliver noted, we note that the commission admitted they did not have any facts to support not certifying the election results. State Supreme Court ordered certification. 2 of the 3 commissioners complied with that order. The 3rd official, Coy Griffin, stated, and I quote, "My vote to remain a no isn't based on any evidence. It's not based on any facts. It's only based on my gut and my gut feeling and my own intuition. And that's all I need to base my vote on the elections right there." It doesn't get any more beyond the pale than that. So just go with your gut and disenfranchise voters, hold up an election, believe there's election fraud when there's no proof. And I go back to the January 6th committee hearings and what happened on that date and everything leading up to it. And what I'm really getting at is the idea that people need to be held accountable. Okay, there's been quite a bit that's come out in the committee hearings that indicates a great deal of culpability for lots of individuals. And I think we're starting to see the ball rolling in that direction, right? You have the DOJ getting a little more involved. We have the search warrants that were issued and executed on Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman. I think there's more of that to come. So oftentimes, people say these sort of committee hearings, and I, in my own head, I can go back to Iran-Contra that happened in my lifetime that, nothing ever really comes of it, right? Nobody really ever pays a real price for it. The hope has to be that this is going to be different, because you can see from these 4 examples, people continue to push these ideas of election fraud. And, really, really importantly, in this next turn, the Supreme Court is likely to take up a case that essentially is going to determine whether or not state courts can sort of oversee state legislatures. Basically, meaning this. If a state legislature makes the decision to throw out the popular vote in their state and award electors to another candidate, can anybody stop them? Okay, that's terrifying. If you believe in democracy at all, if you believe that your vote matters at all, that is a case that you need to be following closely. Okay, these are things that could impact everyone. Basically, we could just give the electors to whoever we want to. Okay, this is also another reminder that every election matters. Even those local elections, your state legislature, your state senate, whatever it is, they all matter. Okay, this takes us now to our Supreme Court decisions. The first, of course, was a focus on the Second Amendment. And so I think it's important to talk about the actual words in the Second Amendment, right? A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms, shall not be infringed. Okay, well-regulated meaning what? So dictionary definitions kind of come around to controlled or supervised to conform to rules, regulations, tradition. And so some level of control, right? The rules and regulations, I believe this is the reason why. And I will mention again, I am a gun owner. I do support the Second Amendment. I do believe we have the right to own them. But I also think that the government does have a right to impose some rules and regulations. I think that comes from just that particular statement, this idea of a well-regulated militia. Okay. Next, we need to talk about what is the meaning of militia. Okay. And there's a couple. A military force that is raised from the civilian population to supplement a regular army in an emergency. Okay. Creating a militia was no answer to the Army's manpower problem, right? This idea that coming from the people. A military force that engages in rebel or terrorist activities in opposition to a regular army, or all able-bodied civilians eligible by law for military service. And I think from each of those definitions, we get the idea that militia really does mean the people, okay? It doesn't have to be this group that is raised from civilian population. It's you're ready when that emergency arises, right? So in order to do that, you need to be able to have the arms, right? So that you can respond to that emergency when it occurs. So I think this is where we get the kind of basis for where we are in America now with our gun laws, right? In this particular case, New York Rifle and Pistol versus Bruin, this dealt with the idea of concealed carry processes within the state. And there's basically 3 standards, right? One, constitutional carry. This is allowed in 24 states. This is where there is no process. You do not need a permit. You do not need, you just need to be a legally able to possess a firearm, and you are allowed to concealed carry in those states. Then we have what we call may issue states. Previous to this ruling, there were 8 may issue states. And then the rest were what we call shall issue states. And it is important to note this case was not a case regarding constitutional carry. It focused more on the permit process. May issue basically means that you can meet a standard set to obtain a concealed carry weapons permit. However, there still could be a prohibition. Often in the may issue states, this is based on some sort of demonstrated need that, there have been like threats on you or someone that close to you or in your family. Also, sometimes, this need can be demonstrated by like maybe you're in a profession where a lot of cash or high value items, like if you're a jeweler who transports jewelry and large sums of cash, this is sometimes used to meet that may issue standard of a demonstrated need. Okay. And then of course the shall issue state, where once you meet the standard to be a concealed carry, have a concealed carry weapons permit, then the permit is issued. And so in this particular case, what the court ruled was that this may issue standard went too far. Okay, that you could have a shall issue, that you could have a standard that individuals have to meet. They have to be a legal gun owner. Usually there's some sort of training that's required, some sort of class. There's also fees associated with that. That these things were okay, but that imposing the additional standard beyond that is what was unconstitutional. And so this is going to have impact in those may issue states. And so those states are California, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, and New York. Okay. And although SCOTUS did note that they were okay with states having a process, they did note that because any permitting scheme can be put towards abusive ends, we do not rule out constitutional challenges to shall issue regimes where, for example, lengthy wait times in processing license applications or exorbitant fees deny ordinary citizens their right to public carry. And so basically what the Supreme Court was saying is kind of issuing a warning to these may issue states, right? You may start to try to craft some legislation to impose shall issue standards that really actually themselves become unconstitutional. And if that happens, we are more than willing, the Supreme Court, to hear those cases and to rule on them. So kind of like a warning not to do that. I live in California. I'm actually get a newsletter from Attorney General Rob Bonta. And California is one of the most restrictive states in the country when it comes to firearms. And his response to the ruling in Bruin: Californians are committed to safeguarding our citizens, our children, and our future through common sense gun laws. Okay, states still have the right to limit concealed carry permits to those who may safely possess firearms. So putting forth this idea that things are going to happen and in California to along the lines of going to this shall issue process, but that they're still going to try to find a way to put in what they call common sense gun laws that may lead to some restrictions and just see how far they can go without getting constitutional challenges to them. A result I can kind of share locally with this decision by the Supreme Court: concealed carry weapons classes here in California are filling up. A federally licensed firearm dealer I am very familiar with, I have shopped there, I will point that out, Redstone Firearms in Burbank, California. Just a few days after the ruling, their classes for concealed carry were booked through the middle of July. Also, what's likely to come from this Bruin ruling is to lead to some challenges on some of the state's limits on ammunition, gun type, and magazine limits as well. Another point on concealed carry, kind of personally, something that I've experienced. Several years ago, I moved to Atlanta, Georgia, for a short period of time, for about a year, a little over a year. While I was in Georgia, and it still is a concealed carry state. And there was a little bit of a different sense in the air. People were a little more comfortable in some situations where they might have been less comfortable, because there was a sense that there was less crime in certain instances because the criminals didn't know who might be carrying a gun. Possibly it may make you think twice about what you're going to do. And if you look, you can find, different anecdotes. In West Virginia, recently there was I believe it was termed as a mass shooting that was stopped by a concealed carry citizen. So I think there's definitely some support for why you should allow concealed carry. And personally, I do think that as long as people undergo proper training and they're responsible gun owners and they obtain their firearms legally, that concealed carry is actually probably not a bad idea. Okay, next from the Supreme Court, we have Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This is the case from Mississippi that essentially overturned Roe versus Wade. Initially, the case wanted to challenge the state's ban on abortion after 15 weeks, which was inconsistent with the legal standard based on Roe, and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which had established the standard at bans on abortion after 24 weeks. The state primarily wanted to maintain this 15-week standard, but once Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed, they then actually asked for Roe and subsequently Casey to be overturned outright by the Supreme Court, and that is exactly what happened. Also of note, Chief Justice John Roberts did write a decision, and basically he wanted to maintain the 15-week ban. He didn't want to go all the way to the complete overturning of Roe versus Wade. This court ruling sent it back to the states. This also went against what Gorsuch, Coney Barrett, and Kavanaugh had stated in their hearings before the Senate, with their confirmation hearings, where they kind of had said that Roe was settled law, at least leaving some with the impression that they weren't going to overturn Roe. Of course, I really think if you really actually believed that, if you didn't understand that those justices were being appointed specifically to achieve this end, then there's a bridge in New York I'd like to sell you, and some choice land in Florida, and maybe some beachfront property in Nevada I'd like to sell you. So what was the impact of this overturning of Roe? All right, 9 states with trigger laws immediately outlawed abortion. All right, up to 13 other states within about 30 days of the decision, and overall, about 26 states will have either a previous law that banned abortion in effect, or their trigger laws will go into effect. Okay. Also, very troubling is that several states do not have an exception for rape or incest. Okay, those states include Arkansas, Alabama, Kentucky, Louisiana, Mississippi, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, West Virginia, and Wisconsin. And already the impact of the overturning of Roe has been felt. You may have heard there was a 10-year-old girl in Ohio. She was 6 weeks and 3 days pregnant. Being that she was 10 years old, it shouldn't surprise you. The pregnancy was a result of her being raped, allegedly by her father. And she had to leave Ohio and go to Indiana in order to have the abortion. Some other changes that automatically went into effect. The last abortion clinic in North Dakota is moving to neighboring Minnesota. Also, many states who have already outlawed abortion are now calling for a national ban, also calling for prosecution of women who travel to other states to have abortions. This particular point has now had many, telling women that, if you have an app on your phone, many women use an app on their phone to track their menstrual cycle. They're saying you need to delete that app. You also, if you have a phone, you need to know that phone tracks where you are at all times. There's also all other kind of information on your phone. You now have to become more concerned with what information your healthcare provider is willing to release. And I think if any of these laws do get put into effect, and which it won't surprise me if some states do, they'll certainly face some stiff legal challenges. I don't know. I don't think the court will go that far and say that you could prosecute a woman going from one state to another. Personally, I think the idea is preposterous, but people are calling for it. You also now on the other side, you have major corporations stating they will help fund travel for employees of theirs who are seeking abortions, who, because of the changes in the law, now have to go out of state. And I do think that I want to talk a little bit about personally where I am with abortion. I personally don't believe that it should be a form of birth control. Okay. I think some of the issues with the way abortion law stood prior to the overturning of Roe that dealt with the father. If you were the father, you were obviously you took part in the act, and so you were tied in. But if you were a father who wanted to raise your child, there was no mechanism in place for you to force that to happen. And I think part of the reason why is because then you're imposing something on someone else in their body. Okay. And I think, even though there were some issues regarding that, fathers, you're 100%, responsible as you should be, but you couldn't, there was no path for you to have your child if the woman who was pregnant decided that she wanted to terminate the pregnancy. But I don't know how you solve that, because it's somebody else, has to have the baby. But ultimately, where I'm at is this idea of body autonomy. Okay. And I'm going to share with you an example of body autonomy that I think kind of captures why, why this was an incorrect decision. All right. So the example that was given that I read somewhere was regarding a bone marrow transplant, right? So if you had an individual who was a bone marrow transplant match for a child, okay, you could not, the government, the courts could not make that person give that bone marrow transplant to that child, even though it could save their life. Okay. Even further, if that child was the child of the person who had the bone marrow match, you still could not compel that person to give the bone marrow to the child because of body autonomy. Okay. So you actually have, and there's no question as to the status of a child that's living right outside the womb. It's a person, right? And there's no question of, is it a fetus? Is it a person? But even in that instance, You can't compel someone else to do something with their body for another. Okay. And this ultimately is why I come down to being pro-choice. All right. I think there's some issues with abortion. I think some of what was already there made a lot of sense. You often heard these claims of these partial birth abortions, or large numbers of abortions that occurred in the third trimester. There were actually I think it was 80, 88, maybe 90% of all abortions were already performed in that first 24 weeks. Uh, you know, Even a 6 week ban, most women don't even know they're pregnant in the first 6 weeks. So even a 6 week ban basically makes abortion illegal. And this idea of body autonomy, again, is really why I sit where I do in terms of being ultimately pro-choice. Just again, you can't tell someone else what to do with their body. All right. And what are the additional concerns from this? We kind of mentioned that many are calling for this national ban now on abortion. Former Vice President Mike Pence is one of the ones sort of leading the charge on that. Also, really disturbing was that the way that the court came to this decision, they basically established a legal standard that denied the right to privacy. Okay, this calls into question other cases. This calls into question Lawrence, which deals with how you may have sex with another individual. Obergefell, which deals with same-sex marriage. Some people have even extended to Loving versus Virginia, which is interracial marriage, which made it basically legal everywhere and need to be recognized all throughout the United States. And then you have statements from Justice Thomas, which basically was saying, with respect to Lawrence and Obergefell, hey, bring me a case. So while there was no ruling, and Alito tried to sort of say, well, we just sort of apply this to this standard, we're not really going after those. You now have Thomas kind of hinting at the idea of like, hey, if you could bring us a case along these lines, that we may be ready to move in that direction. I'm really, conservative most of my life. This idea that we want to keep the government out of our bedrooms and that we have this right to privacy is something that I had heard championed by conservatives often. Yet now we've seen with this desire to have Roe overturned, and now the manner in which it was done, that they seem to be okay with giving this up. And anytime you start giving up rights, and I mentioned this before, kind of hearkening back to the January 6th committee hearings. One of my concerns was watching the committee and why it was important was, are they going to make any efforts to try to get us to give up rights, right? These are things you don't want to give up, all right? And that's a major area of concern here. Not just the fact that the rights were taken away, what this is going to mean for women all across America, but what it's going to mean in the future. All right, that brings us to the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is the first major gun legislation in about 30 years. And, after the Buffalo and Uvalde mass shootings, I had kind of was posting an episode. I just sort of noticed that about a year ago, I had done a Second Amendment episode in March of 2021. This was following the high-profile shootings at that time, were the Atlanta spa shootings and the shooting at the Boulder grocery store. And initially I was depressed because I re-listened to that podcast, and the issues that sort of were at hand then were the same issues that we were talking about after Buffalo and Uvalde. And there had been no movement. And that was, specifically the age of gun owners, whether or not it should be raised from 18 to 21 for long rifles, as it is, federally mandated for handguns. The gun show loophole, the ability for individuals to sell guns directly without any sort of background checks. Red flag laws, which would allow when people demonstrate concerning behavior, that there could be a period where they would lose access to their guns until it was determined that they weren't of sound mind and weren't going to be a danger to themselves or others. And then the major issue, one of the major issues I think overall with laws related to guns, is that with those who are charged with domestic violence, there's a major connection between people who have been convicted of domestic violence and gun violence after that conviction, and the ability for those individuals to still be able to obtain firearms. And that basically, each of those issues was addressed in part, by the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act. And so overall, I would term it as a good start. I think there's more work that needs to be done. And so we'll kind of break down what is actually in the bill. So there's $750 million for states to enact and administer red flag laws. it's important to note too with the red flag laws, we need to make sure that this isn't any effort to create a national gun list. What the legal process is going to be, who's going to oversee this legal process. It should be very strict, right? If you're going to be able to even temporarily suspend someone's right, someone who was previously a legal gun owner to have the right to a firearm, and then what checks are in place to prevent abuse, right? Those are things that sort of need to be done to make sure that these red flag laws, meet the standard of protecting, offering further protections, but making sure that we're not infringing on individuals' rights outside of this temporary period where we need to just make sure that everything is okay. Those, as it relates to domestic violence, those who are convicted of domestic violence, who are in a relationship, are not eligible. There would be a 5-year review period for these individuals. If there were no intervening prohibiting crimes or similar offenses, they would then be removed from the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, which would then allow them access to becoming a legal gun owner. One of the other issues here, though, is that the relationship standard is very stringent. I personally believe, especially given the numbers of individuals with domestic violence convictions and gun violence, that if you have any conviction for domestic violence, regardless of your relationship status, that should prohibit you, at least for this 5-year period that the bill imposes. Also, it defines better what a federal firearms dealer is. Okay. In addition to that, cracks down on criminals who illegally evade licensing requirements, and also clarifies which sellers need to register, provides for background checks, and to keep appropriate records. Again, a good start. However, it does not completely close the gun show loophole, so there is still the ability for individuals to sell a firearm directly without a background check. And then that sort of, is limited to the integrity of the individual who is selling the firearm. Okay. For 18 to 21-year-old buyers, there is an enhanced review process, which includes a review of their juvenile and mental health records. The bill gives a 3-day to review and then 10 days to investigate these records. Okay, also provides additional funding to the FBI for the investigation and grants to states to update their criminal and mental health records. This is a major issue. The lack of reporting in the current system doesn't eliminate, often doesn't eliminate people from purchasing firearms that it should. And then it also, some of the issues here, it doesn't eliminate the Charleston exception for all purchases. The Charleston exception being that in many states, there is a 3-day window for a background check. And if the background check does not come back within those 3 days, then you are granted the ability to purchase the firearm. This, you may remember Dylan Roof in Charleston, who this is how he was able to obtain a firearm before he killed the 9 individuals at the church in South Carolina. Okay. The bill does also impose penalties for straw purchases. So straw purchases is basically, it's legal for me to purchase a gun. So I go to the gun store, I purchase the gun, and then I now sell that gun to someone who I know may not have the ability to purchase that gun legally. It creates some federal trafficking and criminal offenses. This will allow prosecution of individuals who take part in these straw purchases. Again, this has an impact, but it doesn't completely eliminate this gun show loophole. It's still going to be instances where it's going to be legal for individuals to sell firearms directly without a background check. About $250 million in funding for violence prevention programs, funds for child and family mental health services, and increased funding for schools, $500 million for school-based mental health. This breaks down, again, one of the issues here is the amount of money. That breaks down to roughly $5,000 for every school in America. So while it would have an impact, it'd be very limited. $500 million to train school-based mental health staff. Again, with the number of schools in America, should every school request funding, that's going to limit the impact of that assistance. $1 billion to improve student learning. $50 million to fund extracurricular, after-school, and summer learning programs. And $300 million for school safety, but prohibits the use of those funds under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act to train or equip any person with dangerous weapons in schools. This would include teachers and staff. possibly even school resource officers. So just basically saying you can't use this funding. There's been a lot of push saying that you need to be able to arm teachers or other school staff, or that every school needs to have a school resource officer. There's also, I think, some issues with school resource officers, if you look into it, as to how it impacts how discipline is handled, and the arrests and things of school students at schools with school resource officers. But basically, the bill's saying that you can't do any of that with this money. But overall, I think while we are, should be happy that we at least got something, right? We finally had, got to a place where people saw what was happening and said, enough is enough. But that's not really enough money to make a huge impact. But we are seeing some movement in the right direction in terms of being able to maybe limit those who shouldn't obtain firearms from being able to obtain them. Okay, so and now I wanted to just again talk about some of those news outlets that I like to use, that I find really great places, great sources of information. Getting away from the mainstream media and being in that tunnel. I've mentioned Breaking Points before with Cristobal and Sagar Injeti. Hopefully I said that correctly. They do offer a $10 premium subscription. I think it's like $1,500 if you want to be a lifetime subscriber. Personally, I think it's worth it. I am a subscriber, so I really do enjoy their show. They come from opposing viewpoints, but they're able to have civil discussions. And I don't always agree with everything that they say, and I actually like that. I will admit sometimes there are things that they've both said, and I had one position on something, and something they've said has kind of sparked something in me. I've looked further in it, and I've actually changed my mind. And I think that's a refreshing thing to do. I think it's something that we need more of. And News Nation is one station. They are, you can find them streaming online. They are on some cable outlets. I know they are on DirecTV. To this point, as much as I've watched it, they do seem to have a little bit more of a neutral stance, just sort of presenting the facts and allowing you to make an opinion on the story. Those are the kind of things I appreciate. We need more of that from our media. And then Ground News is another that I've mentioned before, and they list biases on a news story, and they'll tell you, is there a bias on how it's reported in the left, how it's reported from the center, or how it's reported from the right, from news outlets that they identify, in each of those categories. They have a $30 annual premium subscription. That premium subscription would then tell you the sort of the most centered news source for a story. They'll recommend some long reads for in-depth articles on a subject, give you recommendations based on your reading habits. Then they have what they call high factuality. So they'll give you publications with a really high level, historically high level of factual and credible sources. And then also, they will give you what they call from your blind spot. So based on your reading habits, they will give you articles from a different political viewpoint. I think this is, again, very, very important. Not being in the echo chamber, hearing things from someone else, how someone else thinks about something, maybe a different look on a situation, a different look at a set of facts and how they impact others, and to give you more of an informed decision. If you would like to support what we're doing here, you can support the podcast on Anchor. There's a link in the description here on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Again, I appreciate any support. Helps to do more of what's going on here with Facts Don't Lie. And if you are watching on YouTube, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. We really appreciate it, just to help grow the channel and hopefully bring more facts to more people and change how our news is presented to us, and really call for that change on a bigger level. And that's really what I'm all about. And remember, facts don't lie. Until next time.